Hello, and thank you all for joining us today for our live conversation and discussion entitled Black Women's Equal Pay, Waiting Another Century is Not an Option. On Tuesday, August 3rd, thousands of organizations, legislators, and advocates will stand together to observe Black Women's Equal Pay Day. This marks the day in the year where Black women must work to catch up to what white non-Hispanic men made in just the previous year alone. Earning just 63 cents for every dollar paid out to the white non-Hispanic man, Black women are waiting 18 months to earn what their white male counterparts earn in just 12. And so as we prepare to observe this day on August 3rd, we thought it was important to raise awareness around this crucial issue so that we can work to fix it. The pandemic has not only shined a light on the persistent racial and gendered economic inequalities that Black women face in the labor market, but has made it worse. Black women are overrepresented in many low-paying jobs that were dismissed as low-skilled before the pandemic, but are now seen as essential. However, these jobs are still being undervalued with low wages and few benefits. And at this rate, if these pay trends continue, it'll take Black women more than 100 years to catch up. I'm Shannon Williams, the director of the Equal Pay Today campaign, a project of equal rights advocates, an organization dedicated to advancing and protecting the rights of women and girls most impacted by gender, racial, and economic inequities for over 4 decades. The Equal Pay Today campaign, launched on the 50th anniversary of the signing of the Federal Equal Pay Act, consists of both national and state-based organizations from all across the country, dedicated to challenging the legal, policy, and cultural barriers at the local, state, and national levels that keep women from being paid equally. And today, I'm joined by some of the most remarkable women in this fight for equal pay for a discussion of recent research on the pay gap for Black women, the causes and consequences of racial and gender pay disparities, and policy strategies that can help to solve this issue. We have a fantastic panel for you today, who you'll meet a little later, and moderated by the phenomenal Pamela Herndon, President and CEO for the KWH Law Center for Social Justice and Change. But first, I'm going to turn the discussion over to the amazing Chandra Childers, Study Director for the Institute for Women's Policy Research, who is going to lay out the data and research for us and paint the picture of this landscape as to why Black women just can't wait. Chandra, please take it away. The floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. I would like to thank you all for joining us today for what we anticipate will be a wonderful, fantastic webinar. Today, we are partnering with Equal Pay Today to get the conversation started about the pay gap and Black women, what the pay gap means for them, for their families, and for their communities. I'm going to start by providing some basic data on some of the latest research that we here at IWPR have done on the wage gap before, as Shannon mentioned, turning it over to our panel. Give me 1 second. All right. There we go. All right, so what I want to do today is I want to start out talking about the Black women's gender wage gap with white men. I want to look at the wage gap nationally. I want to talk a little bit about the impact of college education and how that impacts the gender pay gap. I want to look at it in professional and low wage occupations, as well as looking at it across states. And then I want to close up with talking a little bit about what that means for Black women and their families. So to jump right in, let's start with looking at the national gender wage gap. So today in 2019, the gender wage gap means that Black women are paid 63 cents for every dollar that's paid to white men. And there has been very little change in this over the last decade. Actually over a longer period than that. But here we're going to look at the last decade. And so as you can see here, that I've got the earnings for Black women and earnings for white men. And if we look in this corner, we can see that the wage gap is 37%. However, while there's a little bit of change over time, Black women's earnings generally rise, white men's earnings generally rise. But even over that 10-year period, women go from earning 61.9 cents for every dollar that's paid to white men to 63 cents. So over the course of a 10-year period, we only see the pay gap close about 1.1 percentage points. And what our data tells us is that even going back further, if we look at the pay gap, that here, what you can see is the dots around the line. This is the earnings for Black women and white men. It's that pay gap for when we have data, where the dots do projections for what will happen with the pay gap going forward. And so if the pay gap continues to close at the rate that it has been since the mid 1980s, what we will see is that it will take more than 100 years until 2133 for Black women to reach pay equity with white men. And that is just too long for us to have to wait in order to be able to close that wage gap. And so what I would like to do now is look at the impact of education. One of the things that we hear quite often is that education explains Black women's low earnings, or that education explains much of the gender wage gap. And so as we look here at the earnings in this table for Black women and white men by level of education, and then here we also have the gender wage ratio, which is how much Black women are paid relative for every dollar that white men are paid, and then the gender wage. We can see that, first of all, both Black women and white men see their earnings rise as they get more education. For Black women, for example, between not having a high school diploma and a bachelor's degree, we see Black women's earnings double. We see the same thing with white men, that going from not having a high school diploma to a bachelor's degree, their earnings also double. However, another thing that stands out when looking at this is that while the earnings for everyone increases, the wage gap itself doesn't really change very much. We see very little impact. And when we look at Black women who obtain a bachelor's degree, their earnings are only $1,000 more than white men with a high school education, either a high school diploma or a GED. And Black women with a graduate or professional degree, their earnings are still lower than a white man with a bachelor's degree. So education is important, and we definitely need to do everything that we can to continue to improve on education, to improve on the ability of everyone, but particularly Black women, to access higher education without taking on a great deal of student debt, which is one of the things we see now as Black women try to respond to the call by increasing their level of education. We've actually seen Black women increase their education over the last decade twice as fast. Again, they're not more likely to hold a bachelor's degree, but they're increasing their degree attainment at a much faster rate than their white male counterparts. And so it will be really important for us to increase access to education, but that alone is not going to be enough to close the gender wage gap, because as we can see, that wage gap remains independent of the level of education. And now we need to talk a little bit about occupational segregation. Occupational segregation is actually one of the primary factors in the gender wage gap overall for all women and all men. We know that occupational segregation explains about half of that gender wage gap. And when we look here, we can see that it's also important for understanding the wage gap for Black women and white men. So, for example, what we have here are certain select broad occupational groups. I don't have all of them, but I pulled a few to highlight the issues. And we can see that, for example, in management, business, and financial operations, the median earnings for all workers in the occupation is what's in parentheses at the end of each of these occupational groups. And management, business, and financial operations is one of the better paid occupational groups. And as you can see, Black women are less likely to be represented in these well-paying jobs than are white men. However, if we move down to service occupations, where the median weekly earnings is $621 per week. So this is less than half of the weekly earnings for management, business, and financial operations. Black women are overrepresented here. So Black women, more than one in five Black women, over 21% of Black women work in these service occupations, while less than 10% of white men do. So this is a very big contributor to the gender wage gap that Black women face with white men. And we can also see office and administrative support occupations. Black women are much more likely to be represented in these occupations that also tend to pay lower wages. And one occupational group, natural resources, construction, and maintenance occupations. These are occupations that we don't talk about very often when we're looking at the gender wage gap. And part of that is because these are considered male jobs. It's considered men's work. And women generally aren't considered in talking about these, but these can have some really well-paying jobs, especially in construction. And as we can see, Black women have very low representation in these jobs, but these can be well-paying jobs. So it gives us another opportunity, a way to look at ways to begin to address the occupational segregation. However, as important as occupational segregation is to creating that gender wage gap and maintaining it, it alone also, addressing occupational segregation alone also will not close the gender wage gap. So here, what I have are those same broad occupational groups, and I have earnings for Black women and white men and the gap in earnings between them. So again, management, business, and financial operations. These are some of the best paid occupations that there are. But as you can see, there's still a huge gap that even when Black women work in these occupations, their earnings are still substantially less than their white male counterparts. And if you look across the occupations here, one of the things that stands out is across every group, Black women are paid much less than white males within that same occupational group. And part of that reflects further segregation within each occupational group. But even when we get down to the level of detail occupations, we can see where Black women's earnings or what Black women are paid is lower than that of their white male counterparts. Also, in looking over this table, we can see that, for example, the largest earnings gap is for the best paid occupations. So as earnings in an occupation rise, management, business, and financial operations, the earnings gap increases, it gets larger. And that's important to think about. So when we talk about the importance of education, when we talk about the importance of occupational segregation, those are all very important issues that we must address with policy. However, that those alone are not going to fix the gender wage gap. We will also have to do more. And now I want to talk a little bit about the gender wage gap across states, not just looking at the national numbers, but looking at state level data. And so what I have here are the 6 states with the largest wage gap. And so the numbers following each state here in parentheses, that is the gender wage ratio. That is the percent of, that is what Black women are paid as a percent of every dollar paid to white men. So in Louisiana, Black women are paid 47.9% of what white men are paid. In the District of Columbia, Black women are paid 52 cents for every dollar that's paid for white men. And as you can see going down, that increases, yet we still never get up to 60%. In each of these states, Black women are paid a little more than half of what white men are paid. However, an important issue to think about when looking at this is not just looking at the wage gap itself, but look at what the dollar amounts mean and what that means for Black women. So the numbers on each of these bars, this represents what Black women's, it represents their earnings losses over a 40-year career. So over 40 years, what Black women lose each year to the gender wage gap adds up to over $1 million in Louisiana, in the District of Columbia, in Utah, and in New Jersey. It's almost 2 million in the District of Columbia. It's a little less than 1 million in Mississippi and South Carolina. But if you think about this amount of money over the course of a 40-year career, this has really important implications for Black women's quality of life, for their ability to provide for themselves and their families, and for their communities. However, I don't want to just highlight these states that have the largest gender wage gap. I also want to look at states that have the smallest gender wage gap. So here we have the 6 states where the gender wage gap is the smallest. And Hawaii comes out on top, where Black women are paid 82 cents, 82.7% of what white men are paid. And again, no other state, that is the only state that even where it's higher than 70%. Delaware would be next, and that's at 68.5%. In Kentucky, Black women are paid 68.1%. Maryland, 67.7%, Pennsylvania. However, while the career earnings are smaller, they're still substantial. Only Hawaii is less than 500,000. In Delaware, it's 748,625 in Kentucky. So when we look at what the gender wage gap, whether we're looking at median weekly earnings or whether we're looking at annual earnings, the losses for Black women add up over the course of a career. And it's really important to think about what that means long term. And so now I want to come back to this question of what does Black women's equal pay day really mean? We talk about what it means, what the day stands for. This is the day in 2021 when Black women earn what white men earned in the 12 months of 2020. But what does it really mean? What does it mean for the lives of Black women? First, it means high rates of poverty, because that's money that they don't have in their pocket to pay their bills, to buy food, to provide for their children. And that has intergenerational impacts, less money. Think about what it means for the neighborhoods that you can live in, the quality of schools your kids get access to. Think about what it means for your kids' college education, if they have to take out student loans to be able to afford that and walk away with debt. The reduced ability to build wealth, and that is often overlooked, but it's really important. The ability to buy a home, to save money, to prepare for retirement, and most importantly, the ability to weather economic downturns. When the economy turns bad, we have that. If you've got that money put back that you can rely on, it really helps you to weather those economic downturns. So that is a brief overview. Please check out our full brief at the IWPR website. Here is a link, and if I'm not mistaken, the link is also in the chat box. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email me. Thank you very much. And I want to now turn it over to Pamela and our wonderful panel to continue this discussion.
Well, good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Pamela Herndon. I am the CEO of KWH Law Center for Social Justice and Change in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where our focus is on lifting women, children, and families with children. And we focus a great deal on making sure that women are paid fairly for the work that they do. I'm happy to be the moderator for your panel today. It is an outstanding panel. And let's meet them right now. First, we have Rochelle Ramsey Walker. And so Rochelle is the field organizer for the International Union of Painters and Allied Trade in New York. Welcome, Rochelle. We're happy to have you. And let's go to meet our next panelist. Our next panelist is Cassandra Welchin. Cassandra is the executive director for the Mississippi Black Women's Roundtable and the co-founder of the Mississippi Women's Economic Security Initiative. Welcome, Cassandra. And we're also very happy, and she is in Mississippi, in case you didn't get that. And we're also extremely happy to have Sharita Ellens, who is the president and CEO for Women Employed in Chicago. So if you didn't gather this, we have women from across the nation right here on this panel, from New York, Chicago, Mississippi, and New Mexico, covering the full gambit of our country. So ladies, let's talk about Black women's equal pay, and waiting another year is not an option. So you know what happened on July 7th, just about 3 weeks ago? We saw New York City have a ticker tape parade for their essential workers. So let's take a look at that parade right now.
Crowds filled the streets of New York today to honor healthcare workers like Sandra Lindsay, a nurse who was the first American to get the COVID-19 vaccine and also served as the parade's grand marshal. The parade also celebrated other essential workers, including those in childcare, transportation, education, community care, and more.
So thank you. And what did you notice about the women that you saw in that clip who were part of that ticker tape parade that they were celebrating? We saw essential workers who were primarily Black women. And we've already heard today what Chandra's Childers has been telling us about women being placed, the Black women being placed in segregated areas of the work, which often meant that there were lower pay that was given to them. But so ladies, panelists, let's talk for just a moment about this whole concept of why is Black women's payday important and why does it matter? So let's first go to Chicago. Let's talk to Sharita Ellens. Sharita, why in the world is Black women's payday important?
Thank you for that, and I'm glad to be here with everyone today. And, I'm glad that we started the conversation with the level setting with the data, right? So we don't have to talk about the data. It's important because what the data is showing, right, is that even with all of the advancements, even though we're seeing Black women as CEOs in the second highest office in the country, and all of these influential positions and all the spaces and places, we are still not valued for our labor. And we need this day to continue to remind folks that we are not valued and we are not paid equitably. And it has a huge impact on our economy, on our families, and our communities. And we have to continue to keep that front and center, because I don't know that it's not that people don't know about it, but they don't understand how much it will take for it to change. So we have to continue to drive these conversations to make sure that we're letting people know that we're going to be relentless about this, and we're not going to let up, and we're going to continue to push for it, so that the next time we're hit with a pandemic, with a crisis that we're in, that we're trying to emerge from, that we don't see families not being able to put food on their tables. We don't see, families and communities, so decimated because the work is running out, that we're not applauding our essential workers, but at the same time, we're not paying them their worth, that we have employers that are, stealing from our workers by not giving them their paid sick days, by denying them the benefits, by stealing their wages, you know, where we're fighting tooth and nail to raise the minimum wage, where we're fighting tooth and nail to eliminate the sub-minimum wage. If people truly cared about eliminating this pay gap, those fights wouldn't be so difficult.
So thank you very much for those insightful remarks. Let's go to New York for a moment. New York, Rochelle, why is Black women's payday important?
I'm originally from New York, but I currently, I'm an organizer in Maryland, just to make that clear for everyone.
Close enough.
Right. Well, for me, I feel that Black women's payday is important is because too often inequality amongst Black women in all aspects are often overlooked. And there are ways that a diverse community of advocates and legislators can work towards eliminating barriers that continue to feed these inequities within the gender and racial wage gap, which ultimately continues to negatively impact the lives of economic security for Black women. And I think the more we continue to talk and touch on these topics and advocate for the different policies to eliminate those barriers, I feel like this will continue to be our reality, is that Black women will continue to not be given the support or the recognition of their hard work. So the more people that we have fighting against that, I think the better off we'll be in eliminating that stigma.
Thank you very much for that insight from Maryland. Let's go down to Mississippi. Cassandra, tell us, why is Black women's payday important?
You know, just to hear Chandra's, well, thank you all for having me. And just to hear Chandra's stats on Mississippi and how long it's gonna take Black women, to close that wage gap was pretty sobering for me. And it's important because Mississippi is listed as one of those states with some of the widest wage gaps. And this is why it's important for Mississippi, because in Mississippi, a Black woman starting work at age 20 will have to work till she is 91 years old to catch up to a white non-Hispanic man's wages. She has to work until 91 years old. That's why this is important. It's a moral issue, and it's a moral issue. I don't know if you all saw, but on yesterday or 2 days ago, NBC did a story actually of a mom here in Mississippi around the rental assistance and the rental moratorium. She's a mom of 3 who actually had to quit her job during COVID because she didn't have anyone to take care of them. And as a result of her quitting her job, she's been playing catch up. And so that catch up has amounted right now to 2 months she is behind in rent. Now, our organization, we were not in the rental direct service business, but you meet your community and your people where they are. And so we started doing rapid response and started giving resources to our moms and men, whoever needed it at the moment, so they can stay in their house, take care of their families, and have a quality of life. And what this mom said was that we don't have enough resources to take care of my family. And so the question was asked to her, well, what will happen if you don't have the money when the moratorium ends July 31st? And it's going to end July 31st. And the uninsurance benefits, Mississippi decided not to continue on with it because there is a such thing as racism, right? And when I think about this issue, it is race and gender, right? And so Mississippi didn't want to continue on with the unemployment benefits because of these stereotypes about, women's work or poor people or Black people. But this is what she said. When July 31st comes and we don't have the money, and the RAMP programs and all of the housing money coming from the federal government has proven to be incredibly difficult for people to apply for. She said, I guess I have to move out of my house into a shelter. Now that is why this day is important. Because if we had those wages, she could have had enough money to pay for what she needed to pay for. It's almost like you are, as the scriptures say, or the people in the Black church say, you robbing Paul to pay Peter. And that's a problem. And these are the United States citizens, right? And so this is why this is so important. We have got to be able to give women their worth and their wages so they can just take care of their families. Right now, they don't even have $1,000 saved up where they can, for emergencies. There's no such thing. And so that's why this is important, to lift up those stories and give women what they need to take care of their households so this mom won't be put out of her house, so that she can take care of her children, so that she can have childcare. That's why this day is so important.
So thank you very much, Cassandra, for giving us that perspective. All three of you for wonderful perspectives. And let me tell you about the perspective from New Mexico and why we think Black Women's Equal Pay Day is important. We look at that day as a day for setting our strategic plan for Black women. And every single year, there should be a strategic plan for Black women. And when we look at Black Women's Equal Pay Day, that's not a day of celebration, but it's a day to look for change. When we move it from 8 months after the year end to the year end, when we are actually getting paid the same as men, when we are doing the exact and same jobs, but yet we're getting paid differently. So what we are looking for is that we get to set the process with all of the concepts that we heard today from Sharita, from Rochelle, from Cassandra, as a part of that strategic plan for Black women for changing the day for which we actually are paid equally for the work that we do. So let's keep having this conversation. Let's talk about what are the barriers for equal pay for Black women. So this time, let's start in Maryland. So Rochelle, what are those barriers that are keeping Black women from being paid equally?
Well, one barrier is the access to opportunities that directly tackles the wage and gender gap, such as adequate outreach to women to enroll in a construction apprenticeship. There are many women who are unaware, believe it or not, that the construction industry is a viable option for creating a pathway for a self or family-sustaining career. As an apprentice, no matter of your race, gender, religion, or et cetera, you will make the same wages and benefits as everyone of the same job class. The same goes for a journey person. If I'm a union mechanic working any trade, let's say $40 an hour, making $40 an hour, my male counterparts would be making the same $40 an hour. And this is a direct pipeline that doesn't get the same push as college, and a lot of times aren't advertised for the recruitment of women. Now, more than ever before, there's a huge push and advocacy for women to come into this industry, but with barriers like childcare and the lack of retention, some women are not given that opportunity and support to navigate or even explore avenues that will lead them to careers like this. And there are many, many different barriers, but I feel if we tackle at least things like that, like childcare, and even the support of advocating for these women, because a lot of women don't think that they can do this type of work. I didn't know I could do it. I didn't even know women did construction. I never even seen a woman construction worker until I met my wife, and she was a sheet metal worker, and she introduced me to construction and about, you know, having pride in your work, no matter the trade, and that was my support system. And so if we have more advocates out there who are doing that for other people, other women, Black women, I feel that it will tighten up that gap. But there's so many different barriers that we have to overcome. But that's definitely one of them. It's just that that support system.
So thank you very much for that insightful look at apprenticeships and the support system. So let's go down to Mississippi. Cassandra, what are the barriers that you see for equal pay for Black women?
Particularly in the state of Mississippi, what we've seen is really around stereotypes, biases, stereotypes and biases about what is a woman's place. We've heard so much during our advocacy work, and we're doing a lot of amazing advocacy work in the state of Mississippi to really move women's economic security. And one of the ways in which we have been doing that is that we've been working at 3 levels to move it. The first level is definitely to get an equal pay law, passed at the state. But the second level is that we decided to take it to the cities, and we have an equal pay committed cities campaign. And then the third, and hopefully I get a chance to talk through those a little bit more about the actions. The third is the power of the pocketbook campaign that we will be launching, that really discusses how women's pocketbooks are doing more with less. But in the midst of all of that, and as we're talking to legislators and policymakers and decisions, just 2 things rise up. And it gets me upset every time. When I go before the legislator and we're like, okay, this is the year we're going to get equal pay passed. And then this is what we hear. Well, it's not a priority. I haven't heard a whole lot of people talk about it. Those are the 2 things we hear. And one legislator came up to me last year and I was like, it triggered me. I was like, I cannot have you tell me one more time that women's wages are not a priority. You cannot say that to me anymore. And what they're saying in that is that, and they're saying, well, I hadn't heard a lot of people talk about it. What I hear them say, without them even saying it, it's almost like dog whistle politics too. I hear them say, a woman's place is not in the workforce. I also hear them say that Black women, there's no value on her labor. And so it is these biases and stereotypes about the perceptions of what women's work is worth, and then what is the woman's place in the workforce and in the home. And living in the South, we have heard that so much about how women should be working and how should they be taking care of their families. We've heard so many stories from women going to their superiors and telling them, saying, I want to apply for a job. And they'll say, well, the man's income is more important because he is the head of the house. So she was like, well, she said, but I don't have no head of the house man. I am the head of the house. And we know that in Mississippi, like, more women are the co-breadwinners and the breadwinners of their households because of the single family households that exist here. And so I think one of the barriers is around the biases and the stereotypes of a woman's place. And so we are having to deconstruct that and speak truth to that power. Speak truth to power about, no, women are working. In Mississippi, we are half the workforce and we're 2/3 of the minimum wage earners. And if you say that Mississippi is supposed to be a work-friendly business place, then let's put let's put some respect on that. And let's identify who's in that workforce, and who's in that workforce are women. And your biases toward us is what makes this wage gap so wide. So that's what is contributing a lot of that in Mississippi, is how they think about us as women, Black women, and where our place is.
So thank you, Cassandra. So we have lack of support. We have these biases. Sharita, what else is there? What are some more
Sandra,
barriers?
I was sitting in here, sitting and clapping. You was getting ready to take us to church because, yes, ma'am. I think one of the biggest barriers, well, one is that there are so many barriers, and the problem is that everyone is looking for a magic bullet, and there is no magic bullet, because what we're dealing with is deep, deep, deep structural racism and sexism that has been present since the inception of our country, right? And so until we deal with that and face that, we're going to continue to have these biases. We're going to continue to have systems that don't work for us, that were not designed for us. And then the solutions that are being put forth or have been put forth were without us at the table. How can you design a solution that doesn't include me? That's why we have workforce development systems that are outdated and ineffective, because they don't take into the account who is in the workforce and what resources are needed for those individuals to be able to do that. So I think that that's one area. I think another area is that too many people, when you look at like occupational segregation, instead of looking at that as a structural problem, they pass it off as it's a choice. Women are choosing to go into the fields that are paying them less. So if women chose to go into fields that were paying more, then we wouldn't have that pay gap. But we know that that isn't true, because even in the same jobs, we're paid less. So I think that that's also a barrier, that we have to change the information that is out there. Another big barrier is that this is hard work, and employers don't want to tackle it, right? Because it takes a lot of work to do a pay equity scan, to do a benefit scan within your company, and then come to terms with what you're going to find, and then put forth solutions to begin to change that. It takes work, and it takes resources, and it takes money. One of the other things is that we have advocates, and there are surveys out there all the time. Do you know the pay gap exists? Do you think we should do something about it? Yes and yes. However, people don't want to give up their own power, position, seats, and pieces of the pie, right? So if you help me come up, you're afraid that I am now going to take your seat, or that now there's less pie available for you. And so we're dealing with people still trying to hold on to what they feel is theirs as well. And they don't want to open it up so that we can come in and spread all of that Black girl magic all over the place. And I think, the other part is that we have too many policymakers politicking and not taking action. It is ridiculous in Mississippi for somebody to tell you that women wages are not a priority. Okay, but are you not tying that back to all of the other issues that exist, the violence, the poor health care, the lack of access to quality education? All of that ties back to, our ability to earn, our ability to build wealth, because as we build wealth, we build access and agency for ourselves and for our families. And so the fact that they are not connecting the dots is ridiculous. And that goes back to politicking. So I think that there's so many different barriers, and we have to be holistic, and we have to be creative about and use our imagination of how we finally move the needle.
So thank you, ladies. That was absolutely excellent. So we heard everything from lack of support to biases to that proverbial glass ceiling that is absolutely there, that we can't seem to get over, because they don't think that we should actually be going past that glass ceiling. And just practical racism and discrimination. I just want to tell you one story quickly. And that was in my practice. There was a woman who came and she said, I asked for equal pay in my job. I sit there next to a man, we are doing the same work. And when I asked for a pay increase, my boss told me, this is what she said, well, he has a family that he has to take care of. This sort of falls right in line with what you all are saying. And because of that, that's why he gets paid fairly. Needless to say, she left that job and went on to something that did pay her more and valued her service as a woman in the workplace. So ladies, let me tell you, we have just a little bit of time left. So I'm going to ask you all for one policy. Now, this is going to be quick, ladies. One policy that you would like to see, whether it's a state policy or a federal policy, that will help overcome the barriers that Black women face. And so this time we're going all the way down south to Mississippi, and we're going to see what they think that policy should be. Cassandra, what's that policy?
For us, it would be passing an equal pay law in the state of Mississippi that does a couple of different things. Don't require salary history. That's one particular thing. The other thing that we want to be able to do is protect women from being retaliated against if they discuss their pay. That's the other thing. And then as far as what needs to be inside that law. The other thing that it not only needs to happen at the state level, but also at the city level. If we can get more of our cities to implement the state ordinance that don't require salary history, that will help us close the wage gap. And so in Mississippi, we are well on our way to getting every city in the state to help us do that.
Those are great policies. Let's head over to Chicago. Chicago, what's that one policy that you would like to see in place?
Now, you know, we're not going to stick with one. However, you know, so in Illinois, we have made like some really, really great transformative strides. We passed no salary history a couple of years ago. We just made an enhancement to our equal pay to require employers to now submit data, right, to the government. So one, we need more proactive enforcement of the pay equity laws that are out there, from, you know, workplace harassment, unequal compensation, and job quality. But I also think that we need to do a better job of understanding how these policies impact women that are in low wage roles, and also what additional policies we may need to help for them. But on a federal, eliminating the sub-minimum wage everywhere. We've already raised the minimum wage in Illinois. We're still working on sub-minimum. And we need Paycheck Fairness Act, I would say at the federal level, would be the one law that I think would make a difference for a lot of people, but also raise the raising of the wage would pull millions of people out of poverty like that. So I think that I would have to put my eggs there, maybe.
Those are good places to put your eggs.
Move them around, but right now I'm gonna put them there.
Rochelle, tell us about Maryland. What's that one policy, whether it's state or federal, that you think will help eliminate the barrier?
Well, I think on a federal, state, and local level, there needs to be more legislation and policy changes that enforces, especially within construction, to increase those numbers of Black women, you know, recruiting them and retaining them. A lot of these construction projects are state and county and federally funded. And I feel that
So Rochelle, we're losing you there. Your policies are so great, they're causing the internet to fall apart. Let me just tell you. But while we try to get you back, let me tell you about the policy changes, state or federal, that we want to see in New Mexico. What we want to see is that with all of the contracting that goes on through the government, that we want to see federal and state governments say, if you want to get money through contracting, whether it's state or federal, you show that you're paying women fairly, particularly Black women who are down at the bottom of the pay scale. And if you can't show that when we ask you to present documents, guess what? You don't get to participate in this lucrative business of RFPs with state and federal government. So that's a policy from New Mexico. So, I mean, the policies are so strong in Maryland. We lost Rochelle. And she said, I've got to come back because those policies are not going to keep her down. So I'm going to ask Shannon Williams, who is the Executive Director of Equal Pay Today. Shannon, I know that our audience has some questions for our esteemed panelists. Can you come forth and tell us what some of those questions are? And let's get our audience engaged in this conversation.
Yes, let's, because the questions are pouring in. I had to bring my church fan out myself for this conversation because it was just so good. And everybody's feeling the same way. So let's just dive right into these questions. From Susan, my mom is a homemaker, and I feel that she and other homemaking moms should be paid like working moms and single working women like me. How can I and fellow feminists advocate for the women doing unpaid care work who rightfully deserve fair compensation?
All right, that's a packed question. So let's see. Let's go to Chicago. They have lots of answers there, and then we're going to bring it home to Mississippi. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would say one of the first places you can check is within your city and your state. Find out who the advocates are. And I guarantee you there are some organizations that are already probably looking at that. That is something we're all grappling with, and we're trying to figure out what that might look like. I know here in Chicago, we just passed a policy that is, and it's not quite unpaid work, but it's for domestic workers that requires individuals to pay their home workers, their domestic workers, a minimum wage and give them a contract. And so no longer, hey, this job, I'm going to give you $50 under the table. They have to give them a contract, and they have to pay them the city's minimum wage, which is now $15 an hour. So I would just say reach out to, some of the advocacy organizations in your area to find out where they are on this and what they're already doing, and add your voice to the fight, because we need as many people in the fight as possible.
Exactly.
I'll just add just quickly, there's definitely this movement that's happening around the country on that particular issue. And there is definitely a coalition around unpaid care that is happening. And so I think if we could, Shannon, maybe you can send this out. I can't think of the name of the coalition in which people can plug in to get more of that information. That would be good. But there is a movement right now happening to help states think about how to do that, but they're also pushing it at the federal level too. But there's some models already happening. And so we can give it to Shannon and she can give it back out.
I think that's excellent. And let me just tell you, down in New Mexico, we say, you ask every single person who's running for office the question, are you going to support fair pay, equal pay, and particularly for women of color? And tell us what your plan is. And if you can't tell that, then we are saying we are going to organize every single woman in the state, and you will not get a voice and you will not get a vote. So that's what we're doing to make sure and to help guarantee that women, if they're in domestic workers or no matter where they are, that they are getting paid fairly. Shannon, what's the next question?
All right, next question is from Michaela. What are some strategies that Black women can implement to help bridge the gap, especially if they have achieved both a bachelor's and graduate degree?
Okay, let's go down to Mississippi. What are some of those strategies that we can implement?
Okay, what was the question again?
Would you state that question again, Shannon?
Sure. What are some strategies that Black women can implement to help bridge the gap, especially if they have both a bachelor's and a graduate degree?
I think one of the things that Rochelle talked about is beginning to have conversations about, well, I think it's a couple of things, having conversations and lifting up that women can be a part of these non-traditional jobs. I think that's one of the issues. And having, community forums or, community engagement activities to really educate women that there are other ways in which you can begin. There's Rochelle. that you can begin to be a part of these other fields to help lift your income. So that's one of the things I think is really key, to really begin to do more education in community about these non-traditional jobs and how much women can get paid for that. The other thing and a strategy in which we're using is we're now we got this cities campaign moving. We also have a university campaign or initiative going where we are engaging students. Actually, next week on Black Women's Equal Pay Day, week of action, we're actually having a two-day workshop with students, women from every university in the state of Mississippi, HBCU and white universities as well, bringing them to the table to actually educate them about the issue. But what we're asking them to do is we want them to begin to organize on their campuses to get two things to happen: to get a wage negotiation class or course implemented on the campus, where students can go in and begin to learn how to do the wage negotiation. So AUW has already created the curriculum. We have 2 universities already in the state that are using it. So these students are going to be organizing their campuses to get it on the campus. And then the second thing is we're asking these students to now get their presidents to speak to the issue, which will help us at the state level to move the agenda. Just like we got that Confederate flag taken down, it was because universities, athletes stood up and said, if you don't do this, it's going to impact the economics of the state of Mississippi. And so that's what we're going to be saying. If you don't do this, we're going to lose our best and brightest because they're going to go to other states that have better wages and protected wages.
Thank you, Cassandra. We have like 1 minute left before Shannon wraps this up. Rochelle, we want to give you the floor to tell us what's one strategy that we can implement to help make sure that Black women are paid fairly. And you have 30 seconds.
Well, just for 30 seconds, I'll just say, just continue to be a voice. I'm not in any legislation or any policy advocacy groups or whatever. I mostly just use my voice and advocate promoting more women to get into construction. Like I said, I didn't know about that women can do this until I met another Black woman construction worker. So I would like to just be that woman for someone else, just to be an advocate and that support system to say, hey, here's a viable option. Our schools are accredited with Maryland, DC, and Virginia. So it works towards getting an associate's degree for those people who are interested in joining an apprenticeship, which will help eliminate that gender wage gap, but also the educational disparity as well. So I think if we just continue to be a voice and an advocate for those women, I think we could do some great work.
So thank you, ladies. So Sharita, you and I are going to just have to take on the role of answering those remaining 10 questions and send them out to our audience so they can get those answers. Shannon, we're going to turn it back over to you so you can wrap it up for us because we're at the top of the hour.
Thank you so much, Pamela. And with that, I just really want to thank our fantastic panel, Rochelle Walker, Cassandra Welchin, and Sharita Ellens, our amazing moderator, Pamela Herndon, and the always informative Shanda Childers for this enlightening discussion and for really shining a light on why the issue of equal pay and closing the wage gap for Black women is so incredibly important. And so as we prepare to observe Black Women's Equal Pay Day, again, coming up August 3rd, we want to invite you to all to use your voice and join in on the conversation with all of us as we amplify the message and to close the wage gap for Black women. So again, on Tuesday, August 3rd, Black Women's Equal Pay Day, please join our national Twitter storm at 2 o'clock p.m., 3 o'clock p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Pacific, using the hashtags Black Women's Equal Pay and Black Women Can't Wait to join us in this fight for equal pay. Thank you all again for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Thank you.